It's Juju from JJ Plays Team. Welcome to the first annual Juju's Chill and Read with the book of the month. I'll be starting off this month with BBC's Doctor Who's book entitled At Childhood's End by Sophia Aldred. Um, the beginning, the first of the book, it says, Past or future, which path do you choose? On the back of the book, she lifted the jacket from the hook and slipped it on. It had been 30 years since she had last worn it, and it felt like yesterday. Time to put old demons to bed. Once, a girl called Alice traveled the universe with the doctor until, in the wake of a terrible tragedy, they parted company. Decades later, she is known as Dorothy McShane, the reclusive millionaire philanthropist who heads global organization A Charitable Earth. Dorothy is haunted by terrible nightmares that begin just as scores of young runaways are vanishing from the dark alleyways of London, and just as alien satellite enters a secret orbit around the moon. Investigating the satellites with Ryan, Graham, and Yaz, the Doctor is thrown together with Ace once again. But can the Doctor atone for her past incarnation's behavior? And how much must Ace sacrifice to win victory, not only for herself, but for Earth? Prelude. As far as Justine was concerned, it was almost as if she had been scooped up from her old life and deposited on some remote alien world, just like the girl in the corny old film The Wizard of Oz, except that it was no magical technicolor kingdom in which she now found herself. It was central London in January, and that was about as far from magical as you could possibly get. It had been raining constantly for nearly 3 days now. The coat that she was wearing purported to be waterproof, but she doubted the manufacturers had ever expected it to be worn continuous for a day after days as she had been doing, and with no chance of it drying out. Her boots were starting to suffer as well, and she didn't want to imagine how uncomfortable she was going to be if she had to start trudging through the streets with wet feet. Thankfully, she had managed to wedge herself into the doorway of a closed and shuttered newsagent during the worst of the today's downpours. So at least the spare clothes that she had bundled up in her rucksack would still be dry. There were much better places to shelter from the rain, of course, but recent experience had taught her that the bigger and more sheltered the storefront, the more aggressively the security staff would have her move on. She sighed. When she imagined her escape to the capital, it seemed so vibrant and exotic. The images of her television showed her nothing but happy, smiling people hurrying through the dazzling displays of twinkling lights as they went about their Christmas shopping. Those lights were all gone now, and if there had ever been any happy, smiling people thronging through the streets, then they had all been replaced by Morse imposters. She had lost count of the number of times she had been shouted at or shoved out the way in the last few days. Still, it was better than being back home. She'd take the sullen strangers over Adrian any day. Adrian was her mom's boyfriend. He said that he was involved with construction in the film industry, a carpenter or a plasterer or something, but it hadn't taken Justine long to realize what he really was. Every time they were alone, he'd sit close beside her, make malicious and salacious comments that made her skin crawl. Justine had told her mom, but her mom refused to believe it. You're just jealous, trying to spoil this for me. Their house in Bristol had always been a sanctuary for her, a safe place where she could shut out the world outside and surround herself with things that made her happy. Adrian's arrival had changed all of that, and now, every time that she returned home to find his big black SUV parked outside, the house seemed like the most dangerous place in the world. Better the streets on her own than back there with them. That had been over 3 weeks ago now. Pulling up the collar of her sodden coat, she heaved her rucksack higher onto her shoulder and set off through the sea of people hurrying through the rain-soaked streets. She wondered for the thousandth time if anyone was looking for her. Every day she was afraid of being sighted and just as scared of staying lost. It'll get easier, she told herself, wondering if she'd ever really believe that. She made her way east along Strand, the crowds thinning out as she left the theater district behind her, trudged past the law courts on Fleet Street, and entered the quiet calm of the city of London. The financial district was bustling with people during the weeknights, but at the weekends it was virtually deserted, and that suited Justine just fine. She hurried on past the huge historic buildings that still dominated this part of London: St. Paul's Cathedral, the Bank of England, the Royal Exchange, and made her way into the tangle of the narrow passageways that wound their way through Cheapside. The ancient stone buildings now gave way to modern structures of steel and glass, and porter cabins and heavy machinery of the construction sites that littered the roads at the foot of each. She turned into another alleyway, ignoring the road closed and diversion signs, and making her way towards the steel fence that had been erected at the far end. Checking that there was no one watching, Justine quickly scaled the fence, dropping nimbly onto the fresh laid tarmac on the other side. She hurried across the deserted building site, splashing through the huge shallow puddles of rainwater to where a huge pile of air conditioning duct sat swathed in terraplums at the base of the towering construction crane. With one last look around to check that she had not been spotted, Justine lifted up the edge of the terraplum and ducked inside. This had been where she had been sleeping for the last week. Most of the local construction sites were impossible to get into, but in the 5 nights that she had been here, Justine had only seen one elderly security guard. She assumed that there must be some delay with the construction project, as she hadn't seen a single worker or noticed any movement or goods either in or out. Whatever the reason, she was just glad to have somewhere safe to sleep. The length of the duct wasn't warm, but at least it was dry and relatively clean. The only real downside was that she occasionally heard rats scurrying across the top of it, their claws clattering on the metal. Shrugging her rucksack off, Justine crawled further along the length of the metal tube towards the bundle of blankets. They'd been handing them out at a church in Soho, and Justine had accepted a couple gratefully. The material was harsh and scratchy, not at all like the blankets on her bed at home, but at least they helped keep out the worst of the cold. Outside, she could hear the rain intensifying, the terraplum starting to flap noisily in the wind. Shivering, she pulled the blanket tighter around herself. So long since she slept in a proper bed, so long since she's eating a proper meal, so long since she's had a shower. 3 weeks of rain, cold, and rats. As if on cue, there was a clatter of claws on the metal of the ducting. A wave of despair threatened to overwhelm her. Justine had never felt so in love, pathetic in her life. Suddenly there was a tremendous cracking noise, like a bundle of twigs being snapped, but so loud that it shook the metal of the ducting. Instantly, Justine was on her feet, trying to work out where the sound had come from. Her heart leapt at the sound of footsteps from the yard outside, and moments later there was a rustle of plastic as the terraplum covering the mouth of the duct was pulled aside. Justine snatched up her backpack as 2 figures wearing filthy hooded tops stepped inside the tube. Oh God, she felt herself freeze, terrified. No need to be scared, dearie. The leading figure's voice was rasping and hoarse. We're not going to hurt you. Justine backed away as the intruders started to advance along the pipe towards her. I haven't got any money, she said quickly. Money? The figure gave a wheezing laugh. It's not money we're after. Got no use for it, chipped in the other. It's a donation we want. A what? The first one giggled. Charity begins at homeless. Justine had heard enough. The two were troubled, clearly off their heads. She turned to run, knowing there was a way out at the other end of the ducting. But as she turned, her foot caught on one of the blankets and she crashed heavily on the floor. Immediately, two figures pounced, gripping Justine's arms and legs. With a scream of rage, Justine kicked out, her heel catching one of the assailants on the side of the head and sending him sprawling. Snarling with anger, the other pinned her to the floor. Justine gave a gasp in horror. Beneath the hood, there was something terribly wrong with her attacker's face. The eyes were big and dark, the features misshapen. With a hiss, the thing opened its mouth, bearing teeth like rotten spikes. A vile animal spray splattered onto Justine's face. She groaned, revolted. The smell was overpowering. As blackness engulfed her, all she could hear was the chittering of rats. Okay, that is just the prelude. Tune in soon for chapter 1 or part 1.